Is the 4% rule on safe withdrawal rates in retirement flawed? Is it based on biased data, and is the real safe withdrawal rate just 2.7%? We're going to try to tackle those questions in today's video. Hey everybody, my name is Rob Berger. This is the Financial Freedom Show, where we talk about investing, retirement, and financial freedom. If those topics are important to you, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. I also send out an email newsletter every Sunday morning. You can check that out with the link below this video. Today's topic really comes from all of you. I've received a lot of email and comments to other videos all about a video that was recently released by Felix. He's a Canadian financial advisor, has an excellent YouTube channel. In fact, I'll show it to you now. Here he is. And you can see the title of his video, The 2.7% Rule for Retirement Spending. I encourage you to watch this video. I found it to be really good, even on topics that I don't necessarily see eye to eye with Ben on, as we'll get to in a minute. I will link to that video below this video, but he does raise some really important questions about how to think about the safe withdrawal rate, including a topic I'll cover at the end of this video. Is it even useful? Should we even think about an after inflation fixed spending level throughout retirement? Can that help us in any way? So let's dive right in. Ben's video is based on a recent study, and I'll show that to you now. It's the safe withdrawal rate evidence from a broad sample of developed markets. Here are the authors. I've emailed them and actually had an exchange with one of them that was very helpful, and I appreciate their response. You can see it was a paper that was just recently released. And let's kind of just walk through what this paper does so we can understand the ideas behind it. They looked at Bill Bengen. Now, he was the one that published a 1994 paper that gave us the 4% rule, and they had two criticisms of that paper. They thought he used really biased data in two respects. First was, in his paper, Bill Bengen assumed a 30-year fixed, 30-year retirement. And the idea behind that, I think, was reasonable. Folks retiring at 65, most people don't live past 95. That was certainly the case in 1994 when the paper was released. Frankly, it's still true today. But what they said is, look, yeah, most people might not live beyond 30, but a lot of people do. And so we need to account for that. And I'll just tell you, the way they did that was to use Social Security Administration data on life expectancies with percentages based on how long people live. They assumed a heterosexual couple age 65 retiring, and then just ran simulations. In some cases, one or both die before life expectancy was reached. Of course, in some cases, one or both of them live beyond that. And they just ran a lot of simulations with different outcomes. So that's how they dealt with that first issue. And then their second concern with Bill Bengen's approach was that he used U.S. only stock, bond, and inflation data. And they said, look, we know now that the U.S. did great over the last 100 plus years. But of course, we don't know what the future is going to look like. And we should instead look at international data. So they looked at a bunch of developed countries. I'll talk about how they did that in a minute. And then they ran a bunch of simulations, literally thousands of them. And let me show you their results. Here they are. And the line I want to focus on is this one, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. And now remember, Bill Bengen said you've got a 100% chance of not running out of money at 4%. What they've said is you've got only a 99% chance of not running out of money at 0.8%. That was their safe withdrawal rate based on a 1% chance of what they called financial ruin. Now, let me stop there. I really don't like their use of the word financial ruin because it's not really a 1% chance of financial ruin. It's really a 1% chance of having to change your plan. But they use the term financial ruin. If we're willing to accept a 5% chance of having to change our plan, or as they say, financial ruin, the safe withdrawal rate is just 2.26%. So that was their outcome from this paper. Now, if you listen to Ben's video, he comes up with 2.7. It's based on a portfolio that includes some international stocks. I'll be honest, I don't know where he gets that number from. It's not in this study. But I'll use that just generally. That was his view, 2.7% if we take an international perspective. Now, so far, I think all of that seems reasonable, right? Why assume a 30-year retirement? Even for retirees at age 65, we might live longer. And why just focus on US data? Because who knows, maybe we just did get lucky and the next 100 years won't look so good. And so let's look internationally. I think all of those things are sensible, but I do have some significant concerns with the way the study tried to address those issues, in both of those issues. Let's start with life expectancy. Again, they used Social Security data, ran a bunch of simulations, but here's the thing. In these simulations, one spouse is going to die at say, point A, whenever that is, and then the second spouse dies at point B. They made no assumptions about how income or spending would change after the death of the first spouse. And the reality is both will change, right? Certainly Social Security will change when one spouse dies. Your tax brackets will change. A single tax filer has different brackets in the US anyway than someone married filing jointly. But expenses can change and will change significantly. You've got, of course, expenses like healthcare, health insurance, food, clothing, travel for just one person instead of two. Maybe you get rid of a car when a spouse dies. Maybe it's easier to downsize. And so spending can go down significantly after a spouse dies. And that is not reflected in the study at all. And I've confirmed that with the authors. Again, what they did may be perfectly fine for an academic setting. Unfortunately, though, I don't think it has, for the reason I just described, a whole lot of practical applications for you and me. And it's the same concern I have when we get to how they looked at international market returns and inflation. So what they did was they focused just on developed countries. Now that may seem sensible since the United States is a developed country, obviously. But I have some concerns here. First of all, here's the list of the countries that they considered and the time periods. So they didn't consider them all over the same time period. It depended on when they were developed. So United Kingdom, for example, the coverage for their analysis is 1890 to 2019. Same with the United States. But for other countries, here's a country, Poland was 1999 to 2019. Slovenia, 2010 to 2019. And one of the points I made, I raised with the authors was, look, I understand that these are all quote unquote developed countries, but that doesn't make them comparable to the United States. And that was a big concern I had and do have with this study. They did respond and said, well, they think on an ex ante basis, meaning sort of before events unfold, using developed countries made sense. Oh, maybe again, from an academic perspective, it does. I'm not sure it has much practical application. But the second concern I have is this. What they did for each of those countries on a monthly basis is got return data, stocks and bonds, and inflation. And of course, some of these countries, it's more than 100 years of data. And so they end up with thousands of months of data, and they just ran simulations over this data. The problem with that is it bears absolutely no resemblance with how you or I might actually invest if we wanted to move beyond the United States. What would we do? Well, we'd add an international index fund. Pretty simple. And it's not going to focus on countries the way that this study did. It's going to be generally based on market cap. So if a country has a lot of publicly traded companies with high market caps, it'll be reflected in an index more so than, say, a smaller country that doesn't have as great a market cap. And in fact, today we can get an entire global portfolio with a single ETF very inexpensively and diversify across not only the US and developed countries, but also emerging markets. Very easy to do, but they didn't actually study it that way. And I asked them about that, and the answer was basically that's just not how they chose to do it. But there's a final thing that concerns me about the way that they got the returns data, and that is they went all the way back to 1890. Again, going back to the study, not all countries went back to 1890, but many of them did. You can see here's 1890, here's 1897, 1914. So it's different time periods. It's not the same. But I wonder if they'd say started this analysis from 1950. That's still 73 years potentially of data. They actually stopped in 2019. I wonder if the outcomes would have been significantly different. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Rob. Bill Bengen went back to 1926, and you've said that the 4% rule has been tested back to 1871. Why not go back as far as they did? Why shouldn't they sort of do the same thing? The question I have is this: if you move it past World War I and World War II, would the outcomes be significantly different? I think they would, even over a very long period of time, like from 1950 to the present, almost 70 years of data based on if they ended in 2019. I'd be curious what those results were. Now, someone could say, but Rob, shouldn't we include World War I and World War II? Because who knows, we could have World War III, and World War III could happen in the United States and we could lose it. Yes, all of those things are possible. Those things could happen. If World War III is fought in the United States, and particularly if we lose, here's the deal. I can guarantee you the safe withdrawal rate won't be 4%. It won't be Ben Felix's 2.7%. And it won't be this study's 2.26% with a 5% chance of financial ruin. It will be much lower. And I can show you why I believe that. This is a study from Dr. Wade Pfau. He's done a lot of research on safe withdrawal rates. This data actually stops at 1986. I kind of wish it went further, but still it covers an 86-year time period. You can see the United States has a safe withdrawal rate of just under 4% based on his analysis. You'll notice the world portfolio here is around 3.5%. I actually find this kind of information far more useful than the way that the study we looked at used developed country data, because this kind of mirrors the way you or I could invest if we wanted to. But the point I want to show you is look at some of the war countries. And by that I mean they were significantly affected by World War I and or World War II. You see them all at the bottom for the most part. I noticed, by the way, Denmark, which was certainly affected by World War II, is at 3.65%. But look at some of these withdrawal rates. 7 basis points. Japan, 27 basis points. Of course, this is in 1937, obviously leading up to and following then World War II. We look at Germany as 1%. And if you look at these time periods, one of the things you'll find is hyperinflation. So, for example, with Germany, I'll go back to the study for just a second, you'll notice the date where this safe withdrawal rate was hit is 1914. Of course, it goes then on out 30 years, so you're seeing the effects post-World War I. From about 1918 to 1924, the economy in Germany was in tatters, and in fact, it experienced hyperinflation. There was a time, believe it or not, when prices in Germany were doubling, are you ready for this? Every 4 days. So, if you experience that as a country, your safe withdrawal rate is obliterated. That's going to mark some period of time, some 30-year period of time that covers that hyperinflation is going to set the safe withdrawal rate, and it's going to be far lower than any average or any study has come up with, not unlike the safe withdrawal rates we saw from Dr. Wade Pfau's research. So again, I didn't really find the way the study developed its returns data and its inflation data all that useful. It would have been interesting to me to see it post World War I and World War II. And the reason I would find that interesting is because it would still get us beyond just US data, but it would remove the effects of World War I and World War II. Again, not because they can't happen again and happen in the United States, but because if they do happen, frankly, all of these studies and analysis and computer simulations really don't mean much. We can expect a really, really bad safe withdrawal rate. And that gets us to the final sort of question for today's video. All right, Rob, appreciate that. Appreciate the study. Appreciate your thoughts. I'll watch Ben Felix's video. But so what? What does all this do for me? Is a safe withdrawal rate meaningless? And I actually don't think so. I certainly agree with Ben Felix that probably the most important thing is flexibility, the ability to change how much you spend in retirement. And there are different models that do that. One that we've talked about in the past is Guyton-Klinger. It starts with actually a withdrawal rate over 5%, but has what they call guardrails. I've got a separate video on this, which you can watch. But effectively, if your withdrawals become too much relative to what you have in your portfolio, you sort of ratchet down how much you take out, and you can have actually a bottom guardrail as well, because maybe you're taking out a lot less than you could be taking out. And so they use these guardrails, and in fact, Here's the study on it. I'll link to this below the video as well. One thing I'll point out, they looked at 3 different asset allocations, 50%, 65, and 80% equities. In all of these, I would point out they used international equities, 11%, 15%, and 20%. And I'm sorry, that's a bit blurry. I'll also note that they went well beyond just an S&P 500 portfolio, including REITs down here, as well as small cap stocks here. This is actually a point, not this study, but this point that Ben Felix made, was that you can often see better results with a portfolio that's more diversified than, say, what Bill Bingen used in his original paper. In Bill Bingen's defense, I'll note, he's since published other papers that looked at other asset classes, including small cap, and actually reached the same conclusion that Ben mentioned in his video, that Guyton Klinger shows here, and that is you can actually increase the safe withdrawal rate with these sort of added diversifications, but it still raises the reality and the question. You won't know, and I won't know, what the safe withdrawal rate will be when we decide to retire, and we won't know how long we live. So what's the point? And here's a strategy that I'd like to recommend. It's something that I kind of use, and it does use the safe withdrawal rate concept, and it's this. You may have a plan to spend X dollars your first year in retirement. Some of that spending is going to be on necessities. You need shelter, you need food, you need heat, and you need clothing. But a lot of what you're going to spend, you probably don't have to just to survive. You could spend money on hobbies, vacations, 7 different streaming services. Whatever your thing is, you're no doubt spending money that you don't have to spend. So what I like to think through is, how much would I need to spend just to get by? Now, what that means for you and what that means for someone else could be different. You could get extreme, where you actually downsize and move to a different part of the country, and you have 2 cars and you go down to just 1, or maybe you don't even have a car. So you could get very extreme. I tend to not want to go that far with it. But if I cut out a lot of the expensive vacations and a lot of the expensive hobbies, if we really sort of cut back as much as we could, without going too far, again, what that means for you might be different than what it means for me. What percentage of my portfolio, after accounting for, say, Social Security and other sources of income, what percentage of my portfolio do I need just to pay for those necessities? As a general rule of thumb, I want to keep that between 2 and 3%. Now, you might first say, wait a minute, Rob, there's a big difference between 2 and 3%. Can't you give us a more precise number? I can't, and guess what? No one else can either. I actually think it's good to think of it within a range. Some of the time when you see this very specific safe withdrawal rate, it may be accurately calculated. The 4% rule was calculated accurately based on historical data, but sometimes it can lead us to believe that there's more certainty in all of this than there really is. I would say that within that 2 to 3% range, I would be closer to the 2% range if I were retiring early, say at age 50. I'd probably be somewhere in the middle if I was retiring at a more traditional age, we'll say 60 to 65, and closer to 3% if I were retiring maybe 70 or older. But remember, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to limit your first year withdrawal to that number. What I want to make sure is I can pay for my necessities with that number. If I can't, if I need 4% just to pay for the necessities, if I have a choice, I'm going to keep working. I like that 2 to 3% range for necessities. You may start with an initial withdrawal of 4%, 4.5%. I would say even as high as 5%. Guyton Klinger puts it in the 5.2 to 5.6% range. But if you know you can pay your necessities with, let's just say, 2.5%, that tells you you can cut back significantly if you have to. If market returns are really bad, if inflation is really high, of course, God forbid, if there's a catastrophe of monumental proportions in the United States, whatever the circumstances are, you can cut back. That might look like foregoing an inflation adjustment for a year or 2 or 3. It might be capping your inflation adjustment at, say, 5%. In extreme cases, it may mean actually lowering in absolute terms the amount of money you're withdrawing in a given year or 2. But again, if you only need 2.5% for the necessities and you're starting at, say, 4 or 4.5%, you can make that adjustment if you have to. The final thing I'll say is I do highly recommend, if you're not using a financial planner to run these numbers for you, to use some of the financial tools that we've talked about on the show to evaluate these safe withdrawal numbers on an annual basis. It's not something we're going to set in stone at age 65 and then never change. We should be looking at this every single year. New Retirement is a tool that I like a lot. For free tools, I think Personal Capital is reasonable. I also like Maxify a lot. It's a tool I've been evaluating, and we'll have a video out shortly covering that tool. So there you go. I think the issues raised in Ben's video in this study are really, really important. I may not see eye to eye on every issue with Ben or the authors of this study, but they no doubt raise very important questions. And at the end of the day, I think Ben and I are absolutely on the same page. There is, I think, a limited use of safe withdrawal rate. That's kind of what informs that 2 to 3% range that I've suggested. But again, we have to realize there's no guarantees here, and we don't know and never can know what the safe withdrawal rate will be when we retire. Whew, seems like I've run through a lot. If you've stayed with me this whole video, thank you. I've done my best to sort of walk through what are admittedly very complex issues that you really need to give a lot of thought to. If you have questions or comments, leave them below the video. I'll do my best to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.